Good evening, everyone. My name is Molly Dubin, and I am the curator here at the Jewish Museum Milwaukee, and it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to tonight's presentation, Picking Up the Pieces, Milwaukee Holocaust Survivors and the Scrap Industry. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. If you have any technical challenges during the presentation, please use your chat feature, which is located at the bottom of your screen, and let us know what's going on, and someone from our programming team will do our best to assist you. And although your microphones will remain muted throughout the presentation, we also ask that you submit your questions for the presenters, which we will have after the presentation using the chat feature. So with that, and I want to thank you because I know so many of you have donated not only to this evening's program, but to many of our online programs to enable us to make these enriching types of experiences possible. So thank you for your contributions. And if you are able to and can donate, we greatly appreciate it because it helps us to continue doing what we are doing. So with that, I'd like to take a moment to introduce our sponsors for this evening, the Nathan and Esther Peltz Holocaust Education Resource Center and Wisconsin Humanities. Both helped us to make this program possible. Tonight's program has special meaning for us and a bit of a unique quality. Our current exhibit, Scrapyard, Innovators of Recycling, is what has brought us here. And Wisconsin has a long scrap history, and the Jewish community here, like those in cities across the country, are central to that history. And in doing the research for the local component of our current exhibit, we discovered that the Wisconsin scrap story has a unique aspect, and that is that a number of Holocaust survivors and family members of survivors found employment and opportunity in the scrap industry. And in tonight's program, that is what we will be exploring. Now, please allow me to introduce our moderator for this evening, Rachel Baum. Rachel is Deputy Director of the Stahl Center for Jewish Studies at UWM, where she teaches courses on the Holocaust and Jewish culture. She is also co-director of the Weinstein Holocaust Symposium, an international group of Holocaust scholars and educators who meet biennially at Roxton College in England. Dr. Baum is proud to be on the board of directors of HERC and to have chaired our community's Yom HaShoah commemoration for several years. Please welcome Rachel Baum.
Thank you so much, Molly. And my thanks to Jewish Museum Milwaukee and to Arnie and to Josef. It is really just such a profound honor to be here hearing your family's stories. As somebody who has studied the Holocaust for many decades, the opportunity to get to talk to you about your families who literally picked up the pieces and created something remarkable is really such a pleasure. So thank you so much. Let me introduce our esteemed speakers. Josef Erlich was born in Poland in 1940. By the time he came to the US as a 9-year-old, his family had experienced horrors in both Poland and Russia. His father, Frank, invested everything he had to buy a 1947 truck and began collecting scrap metal in farms around southeastern Wisconsin. Josef joined his father in the business in 1956 and worked there until 1992, when his son Larry became the third generation running the business that is now called Waukesha Iron and Metal. In his spare time, he writes poetry. And let me introduce Arnie Peltz. Arnie Peltz's father, Josef, arrived in the US in 1949. After working briefly in manufacturing, Josef bought a truck and began collecting all sorts of commodities to sell. He and his brother Nathan bought a yard together and expanded the business. Arnie was born at a displaced persons camp and became an integral part of the family business, helping grow it into the largest independent waste paper collector in the country. Arnie is a dedicated community volunteer with the Nathan and Esther Peltz Holocaust Education Resource Center, and also a filmmaker. I will add to your biography. Anyway, thank you both so much. I want to also just start by asking your forgiveness, because I know that having just spent a little bit of time with you, that I could interview each of you for well over an hour and have so much more to say. So I want to sort of apologize in advance that I'm going to try to move us along so that we can cover as much as we can and also get to the audience's questions, but we will leave them wanting more, and hopefully we'll be able to continue this conversation afterwards. To be continued. So I want to start, Arnie, I want to start with your family before the war. Can you tell us about them and where they were and their experiences?
Yeah, the family was in a rural area in a town called Waukesha, and they had an excellent relationship with the landowner who leased the property to them, and they ran a small little farm. The grandparents were very religious, and but you know, they had some cows and they had this, that. My dad wasn't really crazy about all this, so he wanted to be a little more modern. So he left to Warsaw at a period of time. Actually, had been in the Polish army for a while, which later during the war helped him tremendously in staying alive and gathering food when people might not have otherwise given him the food. So that was the basically one, you know, every child was, my eldest uncle was assigned to doing the studying, and he was more of the intellectual type. In fact, we have found recently, his daughter has found a great deal of his poetry that he's put together, and I have some of it. One specific one that he had written to my father, and it's really well done. So we had to, my cousin had to find somebody to translate it to do it properly because it was in Yiddish. But so basically that was the setting for, and the setting was important because of the close relationship of the family that owned the property to my family. There were 1,000 people in Waukesha. Of the 1,000, the Peltzes were 17, and they were the only Jews. So when the war started and still things started going astray, they did ring the alarm and said, it's time for you to go, because I don't know if we can protect you anymore. But that was, so that was Waukesha. It was after that the family spread out and no two people went to the same place. That was one of the reasons for the success. As it turns out, the Peltz family, whether it was lucky or just best able to survive because they could handle the woods and they weren't in the cities. They were a lot of Jews couldn't do that. City Jews who had difficult time just couldn't make it. So the Nazis found them right away.
That's really interesting.
So they were all over the place. Example, and this is not my father, but my mother was married for a short period of time, and her husband found her a place to stay hidden in a house. He also found her sister a place in a home. It turns out that the sister, who was 15 years old at the time, was down the road, married the eldest son, and had 3 children. And you know, I went to Poland with my mother, my sister, and my brother, and we all met them at the time. And I'm still in contact with one of the grandchildren.
That's amazing. When was that you went to Poland?
20 years ago. There's not enough time to tell the story what motivated me to go besides just wanting to see. There were some situations with my aunt telling my mother certain things that I didn't think were straight or honest, but she was motivated for the right reason. So I said, we have to go.
that's a whole other story. Again, if we do a part two, I mean, what you know about your family and how you've learned it and what you would still like to know that you don't know fully.
Oh, yeah,
It's so
there's
interesting.
plenty that I don't know, but I'll tell you one thing that occurred, and this is also close to 20 years ago. I called up my cousin who was 8 years old when the war started. He and his mother survived together through hell and high water. And I asked him to come to a home that I have in Colorado to spend some time. I want to film his story, and I did 6 hours.
Mm.
And all I had to do is ask him 2 or 3 questions. He had a photographic memory. And he was just, I didn't have to interview him. He just told the story. And how did I know that he had that? Because from bar mitzvah to wedding and all those things, he would always be telling us the stories. And I knew that it would be, we better catch this before it's too late.
What a gift.
So
Really, to be able to do that.
It turned out very well. I got a little sort of an assistant in the film area, and it didn't take too much creativity because we just let him talk in 3 separate periods of time.
Let me
So,
bring
go
Joseph
ahead.
in to the conversation and ask you, Joseph, about your family.
I really
before the
didn't know
war.
much about my family, whether in Poland, but my nephew is a retired professor, still Researcher. And he's good at research, he did in the family. And he found a lot of documents on them.
Mm.
We're born in Thomas, Poland, and Komara. And my father was an entrepreneur. He had money, he had forest, an orchard, and a chicken farm. Okay. And he was the lion in the family. He supported them all, And on my mother's side, they had a bakery in Poland. But of course, the Nazis came the nightmare, And my dad wanted to stay in Poland because he spoke German. He says, I could get along with the Germans very well. And the Russian colonel said, if you stay here, they'll kill you. If you go with me, you'll live, So they chose to go with the Russians, and him and his brother and my grandmother and my cousins, they all wound up in Siberia. And thanks to my dad's knowledge of German very well, the Russian army put him in charge of German prisoners, repairing damaged weapons. While in Russia, this young Russian guy told my dad, Frank says, the Russian flag is going to fly in Berlin over the Reichstag. My dad said, you get the shit kicked out of you. The flag is going to fly there. And sure enough, it did fly in the Reichstag. So when the war ended, my dad followed the Red Army all the way out, wound up in Ukraine, then to Poland, and to Germany. In Germany, we all lived in a refugee camp, same as his family did. Walter Peltz lived there. Walter was a tailor at the camps, And it was a very good life for them. It was the American Army was there, and they lived there, and they stood there for inspection, the Holocaust survivors. Besides, we also were in Landsberg, which was hit, wasn't in jail there at that time. Now there, we lived in a barrack-style housing with my grandmother there, and of course, unannounced, they would inspect us, We'd all have to be outside to inspect the barracks. But there's a good little story of in Friedman. There's a man by the name of Nudelträger, a man who carries noodles. He had 8 sons, and he was a bootlegger. He made great cognac. So and even the labels he did good. But then came the military, so you would put a fish in the bathtub, and would get away with it, But they had a wonderful life there. They had a building across from the new.
Wait, you lost me on the fish.
Huh?
You lost me on the fish. Wait, the fish in the bathtub.
They put a fish in the bathtub, so on purpose, Because there's a form of him hiding what he was doing. They thought they never caught out that he was a bootlegger.
Got it.
He was a character. And of course, after the war, he went to Israel. 8 sons he had. They all survived.
So focusing on survival.
Yes.
And thinking about, your family's experiences. So, let me ask you about your family's
Well,
wartime experiences.
well,
how
one
they survived.
tragic,
And then
you
we'll
know,
come back to you, Joseph.
I basically said that that the Peltzes have been very, very fortunate because a high rate of survival. When you talk to survivors, they have a brother, maybe a sister. We have a whole family. I mean, so what happened? But there was a situation that was tragic. And in the town of Ishbitz ghetto, which was a large Jewish ghetto, but in addition, the Nazis were using it for a collection point because there was a long railroad track there, and down the road there, they had in mind to take these people to concentration camps that were nearby. So what happened is there was a shortage of food, and so my father was with his wife and 2 children, first family, and they just didn't have any food. And as I told you, he concealed a gun, and I'm assuming he had that gun at the time. So he left the ghetto and he went to get some food. When he returned, the ghetto was empty. There was nobody there. It was clean, and that was the last time he saw his family. So this, like I say, I don't know, and I'm sure the grandparents end up in camps because when you're older, it's hard to survive, and the Nazis would get you. But we had a low rate of being in concentration camps. And although here, I suspect that they went to Sobibor because that was very close by. And as I'm just involved in the last, I'm going to be showing a film about Sobibor in April 3rd in Milwaukee. But so that's the incidents that strikes.
That issue of luck is so poignant, I think, in so many Holocaust stories. And Joseph, I'm wondering, do you think about your own family's luck? Was there, how much do you think about, does it seem like luck, the survival?
Well, it was my dad, was a lucky guy. He listened to the Russian colonel. You know? My dad originally wanted to go to Israel,
And smart
but
though, right?
my
Not just
mother
luck.
said that we were going to the United States after the war. My dad in Germany, and Neil Friedman, was a very important character. He was a gun runner. He would go with Pete Pellman, who was a Holocaust survivor. We were never in camps of death, you know. But Pete Pellman must have been in the camp of death. My dad and Pete Pellman and another guy by the name of Punim would go to Czechoslovakia, buy guns for Israel, transport them to the port of Genoa, and they went to Israel. My dad was an entrepreneur, was a businessman. He dealt in hides and everything else in the camps and Cadbury candy bars. He was a very wise man, with very quiet man. You know, he carried a big stick in his day. You know, that's how he survived that thing. And we had a chance to go to Bolivia, and my dad said no. And one American colonel wanted me to go adopt me, go to Canada. My dad said no. You know, and we were very lucky, you know, that my mother said we're not going to go. We're leaving the area. You know, my dad wanted to stay there. That was the luck of the draw. You know, if it stayed there, we would have done.
That's surprising that your dad wanted to stay there.
Yeah,
it's surprising to me.
Yeah. My grandparents on my mother's side, they got killed and murdered in Bergen-Belsen. That's what they got. So, and I was quite a few Erlichs live in Israel right now. We have an abundance of them, you know. And Lancers is my mother's first name. It was the luck, you know, they left. You know.
So they came to the United States.
Yeah.
And then how did your father end up in the scrap industry?
Because my father had a history in the scrap business. In 1929, my father and his brother Haskell and nephew Liza ran an ad in the paper, and I have a copy of the Polish. They were buying scrap iron. So it's genetics, you know. It's genetics. The Jews are peddlers, you know. That's how he wound up in scrap business. Came to America, sponsored by a socialist guy who lived in 13 Clybourne, a very famous Irish building, you know, right in back of Marquette University. And my dad went to work on the railroad like everybody else. My sister got a job in a bakery. And then my dad bought a truck. 1947 Ford truck, had a lien on it, and the farmer called up, it's paid for. He went out and gas it, they got him a torch, basically how to work at it, And he drove the country and bought the scrap iron, loaded it by hand, block and tackle. But there's no fancy equipment those days, And my dad had a good reputation there. And from there, he met another Holocaust survivor.
Wait, let me ask first. So is he working by himself at this point?
That by himself. And I came out and helped him out. He kept the books for him.
Huh?
Then after that, he got out of that business and he went into partnership with Larry Wiedenbaum about an auto wrecking yard from Alderman of Wood, city of Waukesha. And they became into parts business, auto wrecking business. Well, that partnership didn't last too long. Larry went on his own, went to found Larry's Auto Parts in Butler on the 24th Street, and my dad stayed in Waukesha. And we sold parts, okay? And this went on till about 1984. Then my son pressured me to go into industrial scrap business. So we went into that. We bought a load lugger from Lenny Ephraim in one box. And we had very few knowledge of the business, but we learned it very well. And then we needed containers. So we heard that somebody in Indiana had containers, went out to buy 10, we bought 200, we were on the road. But then we had a great gift. We got into a foundry to hauling pallets. We graduated foundries and scrap iron and liquidating the foundry. And that was a monetary gift. And that set us up into the industrial scrap business. And then he bought a forklift for $5,000. We did everything by hand. I screamed at him. That was a golden forklift, Good choice.
Okay, I want to come back to that because I'm interested in, your relationships to your family business. But let me bring Arnie in first to say, how did your family get involved with the business?
Well, both my dad and my uncle were doing different things just to make. First of all, when my dad came to the United States, he post problems with health. He really had a period of time that he did nothing. As he recuperated, my mother was doing the work, going door to door and selling different items. At any rate, at a certain point in time, the talk around was, peddling. You get a truck, you buy, you sell. So they tried it. And one day, my dad said, I think this is what I'm going to do. He made $50, and and then they got together. Eventually, after not just one place, but after dealing with one place and leasing it, was really a hole in the wall. I'm glad they lost it. But they went to, I got a lease at 32nd and Hampton. And then they actually got into the retail business where a lot of customers came to the plant and brought metals, paper. We actually were they were very strong in the community in paper drives. Churches would, in order to raise money, they would ask us to spot a truck, a trailer, whatever. And we did that. And one step after another. You fast forward, my father, I can't say exactly what Harry's father was doing, but I think similar thing. They were grooming us at 12 to get into the business. My dad would wake me up on the weekend, and he I don't know what he expected of me, but I basically went to sleep on a desk when I got there. But one thing that we were taught to do is sort computer cards. Now, the whole thing of sorting the computer cards didn't make any sense because we were there to take the colored card out of the center because they thought that was a contaminant. Well, the truth is, so we did that. I mean, that's something we could do. The actual running of the business was highly labor intensive. I mean, labor, everything was physical, especially the way our facility was. It was up on a dock, and it was not there wasn't a plant in town, Irv Rezak. They had a flat place, so it was really easy to manage. So anyway, you get all this stuff you worked there, and we got strong, if nothing else. Harry and I both got physically strong by helping our parents. Then post-college, and the Vietnam War was going on. So my dad said, well, why don't you come take over? I said, I can't, get drafted. So as it turned out, I got a draft deferment job as a caseworker in the welfare department, did that for a year. And then the next year, my wife got pregnant, and that was a deferment. And then he says, okay, now let's go. I said, well, let's talk. I said, all this labor intensive stuff, it's got to go. We've got to automate. Are you in agreement with that? Now, this is at 22, 23 years old. Harry hadn't yet come because he was still in law school, and then he got a draft deferral job, but then he came a year later. So then we bought a property across the street, which was just what we wanted. Had a rail siding, truck docks. Then I remember took my dad to Florida, and we bought an automated machine that did all the stuff that we were busting our butts doing. So that was the beginning of the new Peltz, I would call it. And that sort of lasted for about 10 years. And then we got into I started what they call the brokerage business, when we bought large printers, waste. They had prepared everything. We just had to direct it, buy it, sell it. And that really grew our business. And then we had two divisions. So Harry ran the operations, and I did the marketing and the brokerage. And then we got in a third thing. We created a joint venture with a paper mill in Milwaukee, who felt that they needed security about where the Peltz was going to sell them what they wanted. Because I suggested to them that, we don't want to be short of consumers. So we made a deal with them, and that grew. We started 3 or 4 more other plants, and then the people grew. The amount of people that we needed. We had a customer service department, which grew. We had a sales staff. We're getting fancy, So and it became fun. All in all, it wasn't like the drudgery of the beginning, which was so labor intensive. But obviously, we did something right. Part of it was because we didn't have the competition that maybe we definitely wouldn't have had in the metal business. I mean, with the Miller compressings and stuff like that, they were already big and more, and they had suppliers. We were a supplier of them for the metal, not just them, but we became a supplier. But in general, I gotta say, we did a good job. And then it ended all 20 years ago. I can't believe 20 years ago, we had a solicitation by Waste Management, and eventually we sold the company to them.
So I want to, there's so many things I want to ask you both about, but I want to go back to the creation of the business and ask you about anti-Semitism. Because often, of course, Jews got into business, chose their businesses in part because it's what was available to them when other professions weren't. Did your families talk about experiencing anti-Semitism when they were in the United States?
I would say not. I'm not saying that we didn't. I think the period of post-World War II, the professionals coming into the country walked right into it. They couldn't get a job. We weren't up that high on a ladder, so we really didn't face it. That doesn't mean we never heard anti-Semitic stuff, but I know for myself, for example, in my connection with the community at large, the business community, I addressed some of the anti-Semitism that was in other words, if let's say I was dealing with X company and innocently a guy told me that somebody Jewed him, I explained to him what that meant. So sometimes it's ignorance, sometimes it's that kind of thing. I don't think my father and uncle felt that. I think that they had a great relationship with the non-Jewish community in general, individually, just as human beings. And didn't come across much of that. At least I wasn't aware of it.
How about you, Joseph? Do you remember your family talking at all about anti-Semitism?
Well, we talked about it, but we had the anti-Semitism that referred to as the main street as the Jews, you know.
Mm,
And me, Joe was a Jew. And we had some graffiti on our fences, you know, when the economy got tough in the 70s. We had some graffiti and some cranes under. But that's life, you know. But the times changed, but you don't see it anymore, you know.
mhm.
Once in a while, I had a snide remark of somebody, but you're not one of them, okay? But you live in a big town, you don't see it so often as you do see it in a small town. You know?
Mhm.
But times have evolved, they're different,
Mhm.
definitely right now. But they never talked about it, never, you know.
Mhm.
Because I forgot to speak Polish, so they wanted to talk about something, they would speak in Polish, I wouldn't understand it, you know. But
Mhm.
it was anti-Semitism, yes.
Mhm.
That's part of it. My sister, who was very successful, and because she was older than me, she always had money hidden in the walls of her house in Milwaukee in case of hard times,
Mm.
because she was paranoid. But we survived.
Now
it
that
all.
you've said that, the people watching are all starting to tap on their walls and wonder.
Yeah, let it tap on the wall. Like they did it for Joel Osteen behind the toilet,
yeah.
you know, $600,000. You know?
Yeah.
So how did you feel about joining the family business?
It was not my fault that I was in it, just like my son. He lived right across the street in the house. He was driving trucks when he's 10 years old, okay? It just came naturally, you know. There was no feelings. It was a family unit, you know. You just went
Yeah.
into it, you know.
Yeah.
And because we lived in Waukesha, my parents were not very sociable like his Peltz is very sociable people. My dad lived right in the back of the yard. Me and my wife lived across. Larry drove a truck for 10 years. I craned it about 11, 12, you know. He just naturally walked into it, you know. There was no thinking about it. You just did it. That's how it was, you know.
Did you feel that way too, Arnie, that there was no thinking about it? You just did it?
But getting into the business?
Yeah.
No, I thought about it.
It sounds like you gave your dad kind of an ultimatum. You,
Well, it was-
Automate
it was a
or-
friendly ultimatum.
yeah, absolutely.
I think he understood that changes need to be made. And it's just like, you know, they got there late, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
This is post-college, so we're young. And all I'm asking is, do we have the money to do this stuff?
Mhm.
And I got total cooperation over it. And in the future, we just did normal financing, things of that nature. I mean, we never grew too fast. And it was a group. I mean, the fact that, you know, Harry and I are a week apart. So we got into a business that we could have separate responsibilities so you could grow it together. And then, of course, you know, there's other members of the family got involved in it too. And, you know, I mean, at a certain point in time, you really could see that, I mean, the fact that we sold, in a way, was unusual. I had no tension myself. I think I was 58. There was no reason, but they kept pushing it, and then it looked too good. So, but we.
Do you miss it?
I've learned to find other things that, you know, I didn't get put in the head opportunity to talk about movie. I'm not a filmmaker, by the way. I made a film.
Oh.
So maybe that's a filmmaker. I made a film called Withdrawal from Gaza, which was partly because I liked film, but I also had a close friend who was in the film business. So we talked about that project as it came up, and I'm still interested in it. So, you know, but.
So you've used your
I
time
thought-
since
Yeah,
very well.
I think that's the key. I
Yeah.
mean, in general, to be able to do what you feel good of. Did I like the business? Yes. Yeah, I liked it a lot. I got tremendous gratification on what we accomplished. And then there's the other part that the fact that we were successful gave us the opportunity to be support community. And I've had, besides local stuff, I've been very supportive of APEC and on a national level. It gives me, and I got a lot of that from my parents because they were community minded. And, you know, it's one thing to survive, but it's great to survive for a reason. One, for your family and your kids and your relatives, but the other is for a community. And Milwaukee is a great community.
Absolutely, and it really highlights just the blessing of it all. That, I mean, your family and your families have really continued to bless the community and the world. But Joseph, I want to ask you. So, I want to ask you about your experiences in the industry and what was good about it and what was difficult about it.
Well, it was a good business. It had its ups and downs, you know. I was very fortunately that my son wanted to expand the business and had a good relations with the banks and got the credit. You know, the first time I got a loan for about 300,000 at the end of the world, but once I crossed that Rubicon, it was an open highway, you know. And thanks to him, we modernized, we bought the trucks, scales, you know, and we graduated to our shredder, you know, and that was big money, you know. And of course, the competition fights you that, you know. And this is not an easy business to establish a shredder, you know, but they don't want no competition. It's tradition in the scrap business, and when you reach that level on the gravel business, you're going to get opposition. And you have to go to DNR and all the permits, law firm. It's not a cheap business, but we persevered at that one there. And thanks to him, we're up on the top of the league right now. But you always have to watch what you do, you know. It's not your indolence is not part of that business, you know. And he is a scrap genius in that part. He is the lion in the business.
Oh, that's lovely. So yeah, it's been it's interesting to hear how both of your businesses had to adjust and adapt to the changing times and how well you both did that.
We are right now in a world economy, you know.
Yeah.
We're all in the same boat. This is not going to be an easy time. It's unpredictable. You know? We have a government that's not the best in the world. They want to go from a capitalist system to socialist. And this is on America. It will destroy us.
So I happen to know that Arnie mentioned that he made a film, and I happen to know that you write poetry. And I wanted to ask you, like, when did you start? And I think it's interesting that, and I thought it was interesting, Arnie, that you mentioned one of your older relatives finding those poems. I mean, it's interesting to me to see that creativity next to the really hard work and the, you know, the having to work so physically, but also to have that creative outlet. So why did you start writing poetry and when, if you don't mind sharing?
Because of this one guy in Earl, what's his name? I think it was Secretary of Agriculture under Reagan. He was a real anti-Semite, and he said that the Holocaust never happened. And that's when I decided to write this stuff about. You know, hey, buddy, it did happen. You know?
Oh, that's interesting. So you started writing directly to counter Holocaust denial.
Yes,
that's very powerful.
That's why I did it. You know, before I didn't write much. I was an avid reader.
Yeah,
that it was. You know, I do have a base about it. Was like I said, after the war, tuberculosis. I lived with nuns and priests for about a year in Bavaria, so I got a Catholic education. And of course, I got an education from the Cheder, from the rabbis. And my dad was a scholarly man. He was in the Beth Din, which is a Jewish court of law. So it genetically, it flows in the family. You know? That's how I got into it. Not, I had no goals of doing it. You know? I'm like him, a history major, and English minor or poli-sci minor.
And are there other ways in which you've shared your knowledge about the Holocaust, or ways in which you are
I've been thinking of
Holocaust
becoming a
education?
Holocaust speaker about it, because I do have some knowledge about it, you know. My theory is different than most, you know. Mine goes back to the Catholic Church. They are the ones who started the anti-Semitism against us. of course, Saul became Paul, and it originated from them, and it got ingrained, in everybody. Also derivative religions took over, So we're not the good guys in the Bible. We're not even the good guys in the Quran. Okay. So I got interested in that stuff, reading it, and it's important, for us to talk about it in our communities, It's like the French president Pompidou says, prick the skin and prejudice comes out. We're in season. And we have to talk about it, But we live in an age right now, might as well talk to the wall, because everybody looks at us.
Well, I'm glad that you're thinking about
Yeah.
speaking. And Arnie, I know that you and your family have done a lot to promote Holocaust education, of course. Are there ways in which, more personal ways in which that's been present for you?
Well, right now what I'm doing is I met this filmmaker 3 years ago. He was working for PBS for 20 years, and he ended up making a film. When I met him, we met by accident. He was doing some research in Israel. He found my father's name sort of didn't even know why, except that it was connected to perhaps Sobibor. Didn't know, he knew he wasn't in a camp, but he may have been in a work camp. Well, he was in work camp. And I never was told whether it was Sobibor or not, but I think it was. So anyways, I said I'd help him because he came to Milwaukee. He had a mother-in-law here in Milwaukee, coincidentally, came to visit, called me up. I started doing some fundraising and other stuff related to the film. He finished the film. And I said, let's show the film for the first time in Milwaukee. So it was scheduled and postponed because of the pandemic. Now it's scheduled for April 3rd.
Where will that be shown?
In Mequon at Marcus. It'll also be shown at Wits High School for the students because they have 100 students separate, and I didn't want them to come to the theater and take up all the seats. We're right now working on Madison. It's some connection at University of Wisconsin. I've signed that to somebody. That film to me is a good vehicle, can hit a lot of people if you can get it to be seen by volumes of people. And there's tremendous amount of film out there right now. I have, there's a lot more than I can, but I'll do what I can.
So I'm wondering if we have questions from the audience. So Jewish Museum Milwaukee has such fancy technology that I am going to come this way.
I'm gonna shift over here.
Okay. Okay, so Jack Porter, and I was wondering if I should use the name, but since he
Yeah, I
says,
know Jack.
he says,
I am in the
yeah.
scrap business.
Yes,
Yep.
he says, fascinating, as you know, my dad. So many were in the business. Some questions. What was your relationship to non-Jewish scrappers and industrial plants that supplied the scrap?
Well, as far as me, first of all, many times when people refer to scrap, they're really referring to metal.
Right.
Paper, there was all the printers and box makers. Well, none of them were Jewish, so they were all non-Jewish. Didn't have anything to do with anything. So, I would just say that it had nothing to do with religion. The relationships were built on. I've never felt any anti-Semitism geared at me or my company, and so it didn't exist for us. But it was just a natural relationship, like competition, like just never existed.
How about for you, Joseph? Your relationship with non-Jewish scrappers?
Thank God they are around. That's how I made my living from. I never had the problems with them. A few here and there, that's minute. I say a majority of them, they're very, very, pretty decent fellows. I never had any problems with whatsoever, you know.
So.
Oh, I'm sorry. were gonna-
I was just gonna pose this next question from a member that we all know in the community, Marvin Tick. So hi, Marvin.
I know.
So Marvin talks about the fact that it would be interesting to discuss that the older Jewish dealers were willing to do jobs that were, dirtier. You talked about it being drudgery, incredibly hard work.
Yeah.
Probably work that others wouldn't do.
Right.
What we did talk a little bit about, and I'd love for you to comment further, and Rachel touched on it too when we began, is that oftentimes getting into the scrap business, or which started out as peddling and really, grew, came out of necessity because there weren't other opportunities. But I also love to say, because it's so true, that you find that entrepreneurial spirit, which so often comes up when you talk about immigrants to the US, and particularly the Jewish immigrants. They saw this opportunity, got in there. There was a niche that didn't exist, and they made it their own.
Well, you could take, for example, you could take a secure position, say, take a job in a factory where you get an hourly wage.
Yeah.
Coming from another country and all the risk and the involved, and then take on further risk. It was there. That was the key to the possibility of something better. And I think that's what it was all about, wanting something better that you could have an influence on, as opposed to, taking what you can get. I mean, listen, the fact that it was difficult, there's for sure, but there's a lot of difficult jobs out there that people are doing. Just go look in the streets when they're repairing the streets. That doesn't look that much fun, but people are doing it. I would just say that this was, I mean, it was gutsy.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Joe, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it was the only place to go for the Holocaust survivor. My dad had the talent for it. He had the skill. He knew about it. It was natural for him. There were not many. First off, they came and spoke different language. Okay, so they went into the scrap business. Like some people know about tailors, they became tailors. Like Walter Peltz was a tailor in the old country, became a tailor in the United States, and worked later on became the scrap business because of Pete Bauman, another guy. So it's very natural that my dad became into that. He was an entrepreneur in Poland. It was an unnatural thing, being Jewish at that age. I mean, there were no jobs available. I mean, if you had to work something, maybe you got $1 an hour, okay, at that time.
Right.
So they did what came to them, went out in the country. My dad went out in the country and bought scrap from farmers, because the farmers had scrap iron. And later on, like I said, it was all manual labor. There was no crane, snatch block,
Right.
cutting a piece of beer, piece by piece, burning the car, maybe in the farmer's field. It was not an easy job, not a white collar job. But an American to do it, no. It had to be a peddler.
Well, I also have to think that the fact that you could be your own boss was a great attraction. Coming from a place where you knew you didn't always get the fair deal, you probably are used to getting the short end of the stick, not being treated fairly.
Right.
Being able to be your own boss, I would think, would be a big draw as well.
It wasn't a boss, more of survival. That's all basically it was, They had no option. That was the only option they had,
But once automation started, things moved quickly in a different direction. Because, I mean, if you look at who owns most of the shredders in the United States, and I don't have any statistics on it, but I would imagine it's the Jewish population. Although I think one thing that's occurring now is those companies are being bought out by investment groups and whatnot. So they're just like any other company there. But the stuff that made it happen to get it to this place, let's say 10 years ago or 20 years ago, that was a big hurdle. Yeah. And that was a big, that the opportunities truly weren't there for people without the language and, without the education. I guarantee you, even though my dad and my mom, I think, were quite smart, they didn't have more than a 6th grade education. So, and then the language obstacle. But given, once you have a business, you can be a graduate student.
Absolutely. And I was going to say, I think that ties into another one of the questions, which we've touched on a little bit about, why did some go into the family business and why didn't others? When we give tours of the exhibit upstairs, we talk about the fact that, there are different sides to this. There were some that, the generations that the thought was, yes, we want to continue to have this in the family. We want to do it generation after generation, and really expected it as somewhat of a responsibility. And then there was the other side where there were people who thought, well, I came to this country with the purpose of being able to give my children a better life. They are able to get an education and, they want to go into another field, then they should go and do that. And then there was kind of the combination.
Well, scrap isn't,
You had some who gained, business savvy and brought it back to help the business.
Scrap didn't have any status. If that's what you're talking about. I mean, I don't care how wealthy you end up getting. I didn't feel at the time as a successful and young when I was younger, when the lawyers and doctors were sitting around talking, and I was in the scrapper, there was, it didn't matter if you had it or you didn't, but there's a status situation, but that's no biggie. You deal with it or you don't.
Right.
If you don't like it, don't go into it. I mean, second generation, they have choice, a lot more choices. I mean, my kids totally had all the choices that they wanted after their education to enter it or not to enter it. And it's varied.
Right.
If you take just our own expanded family, there's more people, obviously none of them are in it now because it's not there.
Right.
But, people were everywhere, accountants, attorneys, doctor, we had it all.
Exactly. And Joe, you had really kind of a different situation. And I'm interested to hear you talk a little bit more about that. You said your father had experience,
Yes.
and that was why he got into it.
Yeah.
And for you, it really was, there was no thought about it.
No.
It was part of the, part of your family fabric. It's what you did. And your son became involved
son
as
came
well.
involved,
So
and
how did that?
He asked me a question, would you ever think you would be at that level, that's a shredder? I said, no, I would have been content being an auto wrecker. He probably would have gone to school, become an engineer or a lawyer, But he's the one who brought up to the high level, But like I said, he lived across the yard in the business, drove a tow truck at 10 years of age, 12. He through 8 years on a truck, an heater course. He sorted scrap. He did it all the stuff. He learned it hands-on,
So he
He's
really
still a
became
hands-on.
embedded in it very early on.
It's still,
and it just,
still a hands-on.
yeah.
Yeah. He not only does the bookwork, he can do the dispatching of the trucks. He can run any piece of equipment from the biggest crane to a bobcat, you name it. He's just a natural, And because of him, I'm at that level. I was content to be an auto wrecker, I'll be honest with you. I was a happy guy. I knew the stuff. It wasn't a no-brainer, I liked it, I'll be honest with you, but he pushed up to the higher level, And thank God for him, and I hope he lives to be 120.
That's
You know,
amazing. That's amazing.
And his mother would work with me in the business also. So she died at age 37. So she lived across the street, and they were young and had a beautiful life, But of course, the angel of death comes calling, and that ends,
Mm.
But I got
It is.
remarried, that's okay,
Yeah. I don't know.
I
Did
have,
you-
I have other questions if there are not questions from.
Well, I think
audience.
we have another one, but I think it would be good as kind of a wrap up. So why don't you ask some of the questions you have?
Well, my questions may be in that direction as well. I want to make sure that to give you time, Arnie, because I know you brought some photos, but I also wanted to invite each of you, just to reflect, how much do you maybe this isn't a fair question, but how much do you think about the legacy of your families and your own legacy? Is that something that's very present for you or not on the day-to-day?
I think about it. But not just think, you know, I mean, you think about being a role model for direction, not necessarily just being successful, but what is success? What is it involved with? Is it involved with just making money? Or is it about commitment to Israel, commitment to the community? So I like to keep them together. So there's a reason to, I mean, it's fun to have a family company if the family gets along. You've never seen anything worse than if a family doesn't. So, you know, it's unusual. It's more unusual to be at the step that I started at, because, you know, then you're at 11 years old, you're being groomed. My dad wanted me to take over because he wanted to get out, because he had a lot. I mean, he died at 69, unfortunately, but, you know, he did have 7 years that he didn't have to work. He wanted to enjoy life. You know, he wasn't sold to just working and making money. He enjoyed life, which is what I learned. So that's it. Family and everything that goes with it. To have I mean, if you had seen some scenes when the family got together, like in the early days, and we'd have dinner, and 3 of the fathers were sleeping on the couch, it was a funny scene. You know, I mean, because it was physical work. You know, and besides the physical work, you know, you're out in the winter, in you know, you're cold. I mean, we had a warehouse, even the one that was modernized warehouse, because I was afraid to heat it because you could cause a fire because of the dust. So I would have been nice to have a hot tub. but really, it's intense and it's all that, and it's hard, but obviously you're motivated to do better. But that's no different than, you know, motivated to grow anything.
It's inspiring though, I mean, as the exhibit says, I mean, from the beginning of devastation, through hard work, through perseverance, through family commitment and love, and then giving back to the community. It's very inspiring.
Well, I think there's also the pride, at least I had, of what your family succeeded to get through.
Yeah.
Okay. So not only did they succeed, but they're continuously trying.
Absolutely.
For everybody.
Yeah. So Joseph, how about for you? Do you think about the legacy that you inherited from your family and what you pass on? Is that present for you?
To me, it's great that my son has done a great job, and I think of the family, I think of the past and the present. I'm at 81 years old, and we're living in a very unpredictable world. I really don't think about it anymore. You know, I'll be honest about it. I enjoy the business part of me. I probably will croak in it, you know. I'll be honest with you, but each person's got a different outlook to it. You know, when you start by hand working, building it up, you become part of it. It's part of the DNA. You know, like it's part of his DNA.
But you have to be proud. You have to be proud. And I get the sense that you're not somebody who's going to toot your own horn, but you have to be proud of everything that you've done and your family has done. Yeah, you should be.
But what my son's saying around this crap business is long time, I kind of doubt it. He wants to enjoy life. And I really don't like it.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Can I push up one of these pictures?
Please, we know you brought it.
First of all, this is in Breslau.
Here, I think if you can maybe
Pointing at the
show
owl here.
In Breslau, I
Back
think
up.
closer, maybe. No, perfect.
Wroclaw was the other way it's pronounced. So this was, I was just, well, I imagine a year old. So the times were already pretty good. You know, I mean, once I was born, the war was over, so, so it had to be better. But my dad ran into the problems I mentioned before. He had a gallbladder problem and he ended up being hospitalized for over 2 years. So it was still not an easy time. So here you go through
Oh,
all
wait,
the.
and can you just tell, since you told me before, and I thought it was so interesting how he ended up surviving that?
Well, what happened is they were trying to use animal organs to substitute. It didn't work. Plastics got invented and they put the plastic tube in. He was, after they inserted it, he was 90 pounds. He just had to recuperate. And then we took a military ship to New Orleans and we arrived on my birthday when I was 3 years old. So, you know, he had first he had to go through all that, the war, and then that, you know, it's just like, what next, you know?
Wow. And then the other photo that you brought?
This is a picture.
Which we should say is in our permanent exhibit, featured prominently. So if
This,
you want to come and see it large scale, come on
this
in.
baby is in Poland. These are the family survivors. A picture of that. And, you know, that, as they say in kind of horror, you know, to have these many survivors in a family is amazing.
So moving. And Joseph, you brought a photo too.
Yeah, 1927.
Here, hold it up to.
Hold
the-
it up to the owl right there. Yes.
Wow.
And
Say something, Joseph.
who is all
I don't know who they are.
Where did you get the photo?
My nephew,
Mm,
have to
The
still
one,
voice
the
actor.
professor.
yeah, he's a professor. He did a lot of research in the family.
Does that include people from both sides or?
I don't know.
Okay.
That's so interesting. That's great that your nephew's been doing that
Yes,
work.
he's
That's
done it.
really
all.
meaningful.
He's done it, you know. He's gone to the Jewish cemetery in Thomasville. He's gone to Ukraine where his father lived, you know, after the war.
Amazing.
We got a lucky break when we were separated at the time, my father and my sister. And my sister goes back to her house in Poland, you know, and they had money. She had jewelry hidden in the ground. And the house we had, a Polish lady lived in, a very nice lady. And so my sister goes there at night, digs up the jewelry, and the Polish lady says, you better get out of the city because I'll kill you. So she gets on a train because my sister had red hair. She looked like a Russian, you know.
Mm.
She meets this Russian soldier, says, you know, I'm going back to Russia. He gave her a whole suitcase of Polish money. Okay. So that was it. She found my father. He was working someplace else.
Yeah,
And we became a family again, you know.
yeah.
And of course, we wound up in Friedman living with his family, but you know, we're very,
Amazing.
very lucky, you know.
Amazing.
And on her deathbed, my sister says, you gotta give the lady the house. Because I could really take it back, but I really have no ambition to do it.
Mm,
Now a house
Wow.
was being built on it.
Wow.
But my nephew went back, did the whole tour of the family thing. You know.
And he's in Israel, did you say?
No,
The
he's
nephew?
in California.
California. Okay.
Yeah.
So I
Right.
think if it's okay, we would love to pose all of the questions. We have so many people on the chat who are not only asking questions, but are saying hello to you both,
Yeah.
thanking you both, sharing their own families' experiences. And as we said when we started this program, Wisconsin has a long and rich scrapping history, and very much the Jewish community is at the center and the heart of all that. So, but I thought we would ask one final question. We'll start with Arnie and then we'll put it to Joe because there's a little bit more of a connection there with the next generation. But what do you see as the future of the scrap business?
Well,
An easy question.
I think it has a tremendous future. You know, in Wisconsin for paper, paper mill industry was always strong. That was one of the reasons it was success, because there was demand. Although we shipped paper all over the United States, and actually at one point we were shipping like 50% of our stuff to China. A lot of that has changed, but I don't see any reason why. I really, the only thing I look down the road is to question where the whole oil industry and and power, because everything needs power. But if they develop it in such a way that, you don't need the items that are pollutants, but that's over my head. So I just see it growing. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't. This industry has always been supply and demand monthly, not yearly. The prices would deviate monthly in paper. So what does that tell you? It's not flat. So in fact, just of recent, and I'm just keeping track with my brother because he's still in the industry working with waste management. The prices have never been so high as just recently the commodity. Now I'm assuming the scrap followed the same thing. No, I don't know, but so it's that way. To me, I always like that because it's the unknown.
It is.
And you can try to take advantage of the unknown, or you could lose the advantage.
And Joe, what do you think? You've
I
got
think
a
the
son
engine-
still,
the
in
golden
the
age of
business?
Scrap is eternal. Coal may be passé, gasoline may be passé, okay, we're entering the electrical age. There'll always be a demand for scrap.
Mhm.
From biblical times on, you can dig up archaeology, you'll find scrap. Okay? It's eternal. It's a useful product will be through the centuries to come. It may be a different composition,
Now,
maybe
Jewish
lighter,
scrap
but it will
is
be a
more.
demand for it. It's all eternal. That's the way I look at it.
Don't you think Jewish scrap is worth more?
That's, yeah. That's
It's evolutionary, it changes. Nothing stays the same.
Well, this has been such a pleasure, and my thanks to both of you, and I'll give Molly the final word.
Well, yes, thank you so much, Joe. Thank you, Arnie. This has been just so informative and interesting, and as we both said, just an honor to hear your stories and to be able to provide a vehicle for sharing
this
them more
can be-
broadly.
For people who haven't seen this, they can see it.
It is being recorded and we always share a link afterwards. So I would just also like to thank Rachel, our moderator, and again, thank you to our sponsors, the Nathan and Esther Peltz Holocaust Education Resource Center and Wisconsin Humanities. And if you have not gotten enough scrap, I just want to mention two upcoming programs. On Wednesday, December 15th at noon, we're having a workshop, Recycle for Good, with the Department of Public Works. So really a lot of information, also giving us a little bit more insight into what we recycle, is it worth it? Getting a handle a little bit more on that. We also have the next in our Global Museum Passport virtual series. We are going to be doing a tour of the Shanghai Jewish Refugees Museum, which will be really interesting, looking at artifacts, stories, really looking at the resilience and optimism of that community and its evolution. Should be really, really interesting. So with that, thank you again for being with us. And we'll hope to see those of you in our audience. We appreciate your being with us at the museum
I
soon.
appreciate you inviting us.
Thanks. Have a great night,
Arthur
everyone.
Blumenthal, the Secretary of Treasury under Jimmy Carter, was from Shanghai. He runs the Holocaust Museum in Berlin.
Wow.
Yeah. Gypsies nearby offering their services. Fortune telling and stealing are their specialties. Observe, they are praised, they make money. Policeman approaches, tells them to get lost. Night comes, the marketplace is abandoned. All that remains is litter. People, the merchandise are gone. Night has taken over. Till next time, Josef Erlich.